The desert stretched for miles, silent and indifferent. The air shimmered with heat, the sun hanging low like a glowing brand above the horizon. Harlan Briggs sat chained to a mesquite tree, his uniform soaked in sweat, his face streaked with blood and dust. Iron cuffs bit into his wrists, and a thick chain coiled around his chest, pressing him against the bark. His head hung low, too heavy to lift. He had lost track of time, of how long ago Orin Vance, once his partner and friend, had left him here to die without explanation. Every breath was a labor. Every second felt like it could be his last. His thoughts drifted between flashes of memory and waves of nausea. The last thing he remembered clearly was Orin's voice. Steady, cold, telling him it wasn't personal. Then the sharp crack of something hard slamming into his temple. Since then, only silence. The wind no longer moved, and even the birds had abandoned the sky. It was as if the world had forgotten he existed, as if he were already gone. But somewhere in the distance, a faint rhythm began to stir. Soft thuds in the sand, growing louder. 3 dark shapes emerged on the horizon. At first, Harlan thought they were wolves, hallucinations brought on by dehydration. But as they approached, the truth cut through his haze. Rook, his German Shepherd partner, led the charge, flanked by 2 other K9s from the department's unit. Their pace was steady, eyes locked on Harlan, each step full of intention. Rook reached him first, sniffing urgently, then pressing his head into Harlan's chest with a low whimper. Harlan tried to speak, but his throat burned too much. All he could do was meet the dog's eyes, and somehow that was enough. Rook moved behind him, examining the chain with careful precision, then gave a sharp bark. The other dogs responded instantly. One began to dig near the tree's base, while the other kept a tense watch on the horizon. It wasn't just training that brought them here. It was loyalty. It was something deeper, something earned through years of trust. Harlan closed his eyes, overcome by the silent miracle of being found in the middle of nowhere by the only souls who hadn't given up on him. But just as that sliver of hope began to flicker in his chest, a low engine growl rolled across the desert floor. Tires. Big ones. Moving fast. Rook snapped his head toward the sound and let out a warning growl, low and steady. Harlan forced himself to lift his head. Dust rose in the distance like smoke, and his blood turned cold. That wasn't rescue. That was Orin. And he was coming back. The roar of the truck grew louder, a heavy, menacing pulse in the silence of the desert. Harlan Briggs didn't need to see it to know whose vehicle it was. That old, guttural engine belonged to Orin Vance, the same man who had once stood beside him in shootouts and search parties. Now, he was returning to finish what he'd started. Harlan clenched his jaw, tasting blood as he bit down on panic. He shifted slightly, the chains rattling against his ribs, and whispered hoarsely, "Stay back, Rook." The dog didn't move. Dust rose in thick plumes as the truck came into view, a matte black beast crawling across the sand. It came to a stop 20 yards away, engine idling. The door opened slowly, and Orin stepped out. He was still wearing his badge, still pretending to be the law. He walked with the same relaxed gait as always, but his face was different now. Cold, distant. His eyes didn't even flinch at the sight of Harlan. "Didn't expect the mutts," he said calmly, resting one hand on the grip of his holstered weapon. "That complicates things," Rook growled, stepping between Harlan and the man he once trusted. The other 2 dogs flanked him instinctively, tails stiff, eyes locked. Orin laughed softly. "Still loyal, huh? That's cute." He took another step forward, hand still hovering over his weapon. Harlan could feel his heart pounding harder with each passing second. He wasn't armed. He wasn't mobile. If Orin raised that gun, this would be over. But Rook didn't back down. His body was tense, waiting for the wrong move. Back in town, a very different kind of silence filled a small, cluttered office above the fire station. Carys Thatcher sat alone, tapping her pen against an old case file. She had reviewed her father's patrol log for the 3rd time in an hour. Something didn't sit right. His last radio call had been logged at 5:17 a.m., a routine welfare check. Then nothing. No update. No report. The deputy who was supposed to follow up never did. And no one seemed to be asking why. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed. If her father had taught her anything, it was to follow her gut. And her gut told her something stank. She reached for her phone and dialed. "Cass?" she said as soon as the line picked up. "Have you seen my dad today?" There was a pause. A long one. Then Cass Merriweather's gravelly voice came through, low and uneasy. "No, sweetheart. And I was just about to call you. Something's off." Outside, the wind howled softly, like a whisper of warning no one wanted to hear. Back in the desert, Orin's hand tightened slightly on his holster. "You had to make this hard, didn't you?" he muttered. Rook took a step forward, baring his teeth. Harlan looked into Orin's eyes and finally saw it. Not anger, not guilt, fear. Fear of being exposed, of being found out before he could vanish. Harlan drew in a breath, slow and steady. If this was going to end here, he would not go down begging. Not in front of the only beings left who still believed in him. The tension between Harlan and Orin hung heavy in the air, thick as the dust swirling around them. The dogs didn't move. Rook's ears twitched, and his gaze never left Orin's hand. The other two K9s had split slightly, instinctively forming a triangle around Harlan, protecting, calculating. Orin stood just beyond striking distance, squinting into the sunlight as if he were weighing his options. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said. "But you left me no choice." Harlan coughed, the taste of rust and desert in his mouth. "You chained me to a tree, Orin." His voice was ragged but steady. "Pretty sure that's not covered in the code." Orin tilted his head, feigning disappointment. "You wouldn't stay quiet, Harlan. You always had to go digging, always had to ask questions." He stepped closer and the dogs tensed. Rook let out a sharp, warning bark. One more step and it would be teeth before bullets. At that moment, Harlan understood something he hadn't before. Orin wasn't just trying to disappear. He was trying to erase anyone who could expose him. Whatever he was involved in, whatever secret he'd buried, it was big enough to kill for. And judging by the fear behind Orin's hardened stare, that secret was about to surface whether he liked it or not. Harlan glanced at the dogs, then at the sand. They couldn't stop a bullet, but they might buy him time. Miles away, Carys stared at her laptop screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard. Her search had led her down a strange rabbit hole. Recent property transfers near the desert, surveillance gaps in patrol coverage, and a suspicious connection between Orin Vance and a construction company that didn't actually exist. "No way this is random," she murmured. Her hands trembled slightly, adrenaline beginning to build. She didn't want to believe someone from her father's own department could be behind this. But the more she looked, the clearer it became. She grabbed her keys and bolted out the door, dialing Cass on the way. "Cass, meet me at the old quarry off Route 16. I think that's where he is." The silence on the line lasted a beat too long. "That's federal land now," Cass said slowly. "No one's supposed to be out there." Carys didn't hesitate. "Exactly." Her voice was sharp, cold with purpose. She was no longer just a worried daughter. She was an investigator now, and something in her gut told her this was personal. Back in the desert, Orin took another step forward. Rook snarled. Harlan leaned his head back against the tree, blinking through the sweat and blood. "You're scared," he said quietly. "Scared of the truth getting out." Orin's lip curled. "The truth doesn't matter if no one lives to tell it." His fingers grazed the handle of his gun. The air went still. The moment froze. The wind, the dogs, even the desert itself seemed to pause as Orin Vance's hand hovered just above his gun. Rook's growl deepened, a low, vibrating warning that rumbled through the dry air. Harlan Briggs didn't move. He couldn't. His arms were still bound, and his body had passed the point of exhaustion. But his mind, sharp as ever, was calculating. Every twitch, every shadow, every chance. He wasn't ready to die. Not like this. Not here. Orin's fingers curled tighter around the grip. "You think you're the hero, don't you?" he said, eyes narrowed. "Always playing the good guy, always getting in the way. You don't know what's coming, Harlan." He took one more step, and the sound of Rook's bark cracked the stillness like a whip. The dog lunged forward, stopping just short of Orin's leg, teeth bared. Orin jumped back instinctively, and for a split second, the mask of control slipped. He was nervous, maybe even rattled. That gave Harlan something he hadn't had since this started: leverage. Back in her truck, Carys Thatcher sped down the dirt road off Route 16, her tires kicking up clouds of red dust in the late afternoon sun. She could barely keep her hands steady on the wheel. Her father's silence, the missing logs, the paper trail leading to nowhere, and now, Cass's hesitant voice echoing in her mind. "No one's supposed to be out there." That phrase rang louder than any siren. She glanced at her fuel gauge, then the road, then the folder on her passenger seat. Inside, copies of deeds, maps, and names that didn't match. Something illegal was buried out there, and her father had found it. Cass's pickup appeared in her rearview mirror, a few car lengths behind. She slowed just enough to keep them together as the land grew rougher, the gravel turning into hard-packed sand. Then, just over a ridge, they saw it. A set of fresh tire tracks veering off the road into the open desert. "There," she muttered, heart pounding. Cass's voice crackled through her radio. "That's recent. Less than an hour." Carys didn't respond. She was already turning off-road, chasing the tracks that might lead her straight to the man who raised her, and the one who might be trying to bury him. Back at the tree, Orin's face darkened. "You don't get it, do you?" he hissed. "There are people involved in this who don't play fair. You think this is about you and me?" He shook his head. "I'm the only thing standing between you and a bullet in the back of your skull. You should thank me." Harlan stared at him, half delirious, but calm. "Then shoot me," he said. "Let's see if you still sleep at night." Orin raised the gun, and from somewhere in the distance, closer than he expected, came the sound of an engine. The engine roar cut through the silence like a siren in a graveyard. Orin Vance's hand froze mid-aim, his gun leveled at Harlan Briggs, who sat bleeding and bound, watching with a strange calmness that only came from men who had already faced death once before. Orin turned his head toward the approaching sound. Two vehicles, coming fast, engines grinding against the desert terrain. "No," he muttered under his breath, the color draining from his face. Rook didn't wait. The German shepherd seized the moment of distraction, lunging at Orin's side. Teeth met fabric. Flesh. A scream tore out of Orin as he staggered backward, the pistol slipping from his grip and hitting the sand with a thud. Rook let go and positioned himself between the fallen gun and his handler, teeth bared, snarling like a storm. The other two dogs followed suit, moving in sync. Harlan slumped forward, adrenaline flooding his veins despite his injuries. This was it. This was the break he needed. Tires screeched. Carys's truck came over the ridge, kicking up a wall of dust. She slammed the brakes and jumped out before the vehicle even stopped moving. Gun drawn, heart pounding. Cass Merriweather pulled up seconds later, stepping out with a shotgun in hand, his stance slow but steady, every inch the old lawman he once was. "Drop it!" Carys shouted, her voice shaking but loud. She couldn't see everything through the dust, but she saw her father, saw the chains, saw the blood. Orin stumbled to his feet, holding his side where Rook had bitten him. "You don't understand what's happening here," he yelled. "This isn't what it looks like." Carys didn't lower her weapon. "Really? Because from here it looks like attempted murder." Her voice cracked, and her eyes flicked to Harlan, still chained to the tree. Her stomach twisted at the sight. Her father, her protector, broken. Cass advanced slowly, his voice calm and dangerous. "You picked the wrong damn man to bury Orin." Orin looked between them. Gun on the ground, dogs circling, Carys staring him down. His eyes darted like a trapped animal's. "You don't get it. There are people, powerful people, invested in this land, this deal. I was just trying to survive." He turned toward the gun. Rook snarled louder. Harlan shook his head. Don't. But Orin dove. Carys fired. The gunshot echoed through the desert like a final verdict. Dust leapt from the ground where the bullet struck, just inches from Orin's hand. He froze, eyes wide, staring at the weapon he had nearly reached, and then at Carys Thatcher, still holding her pistol, her arm trembling. Her breathing was ragged, her face pale, but her aim was steady now. Cass Merriweather stepped in beside her, lowering his shotgun slightly. "Don't move," he said flatly. Orin lifted both hands slowly, his chest heaving. Rook stayed close to Harlan, his body shielding the injured deputy as if the danger hadn't passed. The other two dogs flanked Orin, tense but motionless, waiting for a command. Harlan looked up through bloodshot eyes, meeting his daughter's gaze. There was shock there and pain, but also fire. "You found me," he rasped. Carys rushed to him, holstering her weapon as she dropped to her knees. "Dad, what did he do to you?" Her voice broke. She touched his shoulder gently, as if afraid he'd shatter. "I'll live," Harlan muttered, "but we've got a hell of a mess to clean up." Cass moved quickly to unchain him while Carys called dispatch, her voice suddenly all business again. But even as she relayed coordinates and requested medical aid, her mind was spinning. None of this made sense. Why had Orin, once like an uncle to her, turned on her father? What was he so desperate to hide? When the deputies finally arrived 20 minutes later, Orin was cuffed and silent, staring off toward the hills like he was waiting for something, or someone, to come finish the job. In the back seat of the patrol SUV, he finally spoke. "You think this is over?" He said to no one in particular. "They don't let things like this slide. I was trying to protect myself. And Harlan." But he wouldn't shut up. His voice was calm, empty. "You'll see." As Harlan was lifted onto the stretcher, pain etched deep into his face, he locked eyes with Cass. "He's scared of something bigger," he whispered. Cass nodded grimly. "Yeah, and if he's scared, we should be too." Carys stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the horizon as the sky began to fade into evening. Somewhere out there, whatever Orin was afraid of was still waiting, still watching. The hospital room was dim, quiet except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Harlan Briggs lay still, one arm in a sling, and 4 running into the other. His body was battered, but his mind hadn't stopped working since they pulled him from the desert. Carys sat beside him, flipping through the documents retrieved from Orin's truck: land permits, false business licenses, fake names tied to real companies. "It's deeper than we thought," she murmured. "This isn't just Orin skimming off contracts. This is organized." Harlan's voice was low, gravelly. He mentioned they more than once, not just covering for himself. He was afraid. He said, "I didn't know what was coming." He stared at the ceiling, eyes distant. Whatever deal he was part of, it wasn't local. Carys nodded, sliding a file toward him. "I cross-checked these shell companies. They all lead back to a firm in Nevada, Black Ridge Holdings. Private, off-books, and involved in multiple federal investigations. All sealed." Across town, Cass Merriweather sat at his kitchen table, a black notebook open in front of him. He scribbled down names, timelines, and symbols from memory. Old instincts were returning, habits from a time before retirement, when corruption in small towns meant something simpler. This wasn't simple. He picked up the phone and called a friend in the marshal's office. "I need to ask you about a company operating under the radar," he said. "Ever hear of Black Ridge Holdings?" The pause on the other end told him everything. "Hang up," the voice said, "and don't call again." Back at the hospital, a nurse entered to check Harlan's vitals. She was polite, professional, but something about her movements felt rehearsed. Her badge was real, but her eyes were wrong. Harlan watched her quietly as she adjusted his 4, then left without saying more than a word. When the door clicked shut, he looked at Carys. "You saw that?" She nodded. "Yeah." She wasn't on the staff list at the front desk. Both of them fell silent. They were being watched. Later that night, Carys stood outside the hospital entrance, arms wrapped around herself as the cold air crept in. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She answered. No one spoke, but she could hear breathing. Then a voice, distorted, calm, and male. You should have let him die out there. The line went dead. And for the first time, Carys truly understood. This was just beginning. Carys didn't sleep that night. After the call, she sat in her car for hours, parked just outside the hospital entrance, her eyes fixed on every passing figure. Her father was no longer just a victim. Ela era uma peca viva no meio de algo muito maior. Algo que agora sabia quem ela era. Onde ela estava e o que ela estava tentando fazer. A mensagem tinha sido clara. Você devia ter deixado ele morrer, mas ela não ia recuar. Não agora. Inside, Harlan stared at the ceiling in the dark, haunted by the voice on the phone that Carys had replayed for him. He recognized the cadence, not the voice itself but the tone. Cold, military, trained. This wasn't some angry contractor trying to cover up a scam. This was something Black Ops level. Something institutional. They're not just protecting money, he muttered to himself. They're protecting power. He closed his eyes and remembered Orin's words. I was trying to protect you. The next morning, Cass arrived with a folder under his arm and a hard look in his eyes. He dropped it on the bedside table without saying a word. Carys opened it and saw aerial photos, land grids, and a map of a restricted section of desert near the quarry. This land was marked as military waste storage 20 years ago, Cass said. But 5 years ago, that designation was quietly lifted. And guess who started buying parcels around it? He tapped the page. Black Ridge. Carys felt her throat tighten. They're hiding something out there. Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's department, someone was already erasing. Files disappeared. Paper trails were quietly rewritten. A junior deputy found the logbook from Harlan's last dispatch torn in half and tossed in a shred bin. He hesitated, picked it up, and made a call to Cass. Someone's cleaning house, he said. Cass didn't answer right away. He was already looking over his shoulder. They weren't investigating a conspiracy anymore. They were inside one. That night, Carys parked at the edge of the restricted zone, just beyond the fences. The desert was silent again, but this time, the silence felt different, charged, watching. She clicked off her headlights, pulled out her binoculars, and scanned the terrain. Her breath caught. Far out in the distance, under the moonlight, a convoy of 3 black SUVs was moving. No lights, no plates, and no sound but tires kissing sand. She reached for her camera, but it was too late. One of the SUVs stopped and turned directly toward her. Carys held her breath as the SUV's headlights flicked on. Blinding, sharp, focused directly on her. For a second, she couldn't move. Her fingers hovered above her phone, unsure whether ela devia gravar, fugir ou ligar para alguém. Then the engine of the vehicle revved once. A warning, or a message, maybe both. Slowly, the SUV turned away and disappeared into the darkness, joining the others that had vanished behind the hills. Carys remained frozen in her seat, heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. They saw me, and they let me live. Back at the hospital, Harlan forced himself out of bed. Every muscle in his body screamed, but his mind was clear now. If they had eyes on them, it meant things were already in motion. He tore the 4 from his arm and pulled on his uniform pants, biting back the pain. He wasn't going to wait around to be silenced. Not again. He grabbed the folder Cass had brought earlier and tucked it beneath his shirt. The answers weren't in town. They were in that desert. And if his daughter was heading there alone, he wasn't going to let her face that without backup. Cass waited by the hospital exit, keys in hand, already expecting Harlan to do exactly this. You're not healed, he said. You won't make it far. Harlan looked at him, face pale but eyes steady. I made it chained to a tree. I'll make it one more night. Cass sighed, handing over the keys. They're not just hiding something, Harlan. They're preparing for something. Harlan didn't respond. He already knew. This wasn't about land or money. It was about control. And too many people were involved to trust anyone. As Carys returned to town, She noticed a black sedan trailing her for several blocks. No headlights, no license plate. When she turned suddenly into an alley, it kept going. But she got the message. There were no more warnings, no more subtle threats. She parked behind the fire station and entered through the back, taking a set of classified files she'd secretly copied from the county archives. Blueprints, codes, encrypted communications. If anything happened to her, these documents had to reach the right hands. But she wasn't running. Not yet. That night, in the quiet of her father's house, Carys laid everything out on the dining table. Every document, every photo, every clue. She drew lines with a red pen, linking names, companies, locations. In the center, she wrote 2 words, desert site. And just below that, another name she hadn't dared write before, Black Ridge Directive. She circled it twice. Her father limped into the room moments later, and when he saw the spread on the table, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "We go at dawn." But outside, in the dark, a figure stood at the edge of the street, watching through the kitchen window, motionless, hands in his coat pockets, his face hidden by the brim of a cap. He waited, and then slowly he smiled. The sun was just beginning to rise when Harlan Briggs and Carys Thatcher arrived at the edge of the restricted zone. The desert stretched before them, silent and endless, but they both knew, beneath that silence, something was buried. Cass Merriweather waited nearby in a battered truck, binoculars in hand. "Movement near the southern ridge," he said quietly. "Same black SUVs from last night. They're protecting something." Harlan nodded, pain etched deep in his face but resolve burning in his eyes. "Then we're in the right place." Carys led the way through a narrow ravine that cut between 2 hills. At the bottom, half buried beneath sand and brush, they found it. A reinforced hatch, sealed with a biometric lock. It wasn't military standard. It was something else, something cleaner, corporate. Carys dropped to her knees and connected a small device to the panel, watching the code decrypt line by line. "We've got 5 minutes max before they notice the breach," she said. Harlan looked around. "Then let's make it count." The hatch opened with a hiss of cold air. Inside, a staircase descending into concrete and steel. As they stepped in, the world above them vanished, swallowed by darkness and secrets. The hallway below was sterile, humming with electricity. Files lined the walls, labeled crates, computers still warm. Someone had been here recently. Carys snapped photos quickly while Harlan opened one of the crates. Inside were sealed folders with red tape. He flipped one open and froze. "Jesus," he whispered. "These aren't just land deals. These are contracts for testing. People. Whole towns marked as subjects." He handed one to Carys, and her hands shook as she read. "Controlled exposure. Rural zones. Test results pending." A sound echoed from above. Footsteps. Boots. Many. Carys looked at her father. "They're coming." Harlan nodded. "Take the evidence. Get out." She shook her head. "No," but Harlan raised his hand. "This is bigger than both of us. If they catch us together, neither of us gets out. You have to make it back." For a moment, their eyes locked. The same eyes. Same fire. Then she grabbed the files, kissed his forehead, and ran. Harlan turned, weapon raised, ready to hold the line one last time. By nightfall, it was all over. Federal agents, tipped off by the files Carys released anonymously, descended on the site. The facility was scrubbed clean within hours, but the documents had already gone public. News stations ran headlines for days. Black Ridge was exposed. Arrests were made. But Harlan Briggs was never found. No body, no sign, just his badge, left behind in the dust, beneath the rising light of dawn.